The medical center had been operating for 6 years. It was a modest facility located in a commercial district that included various professional offices, retail spaces, and small medical practices. The center specialized in what it described as regenerative medicine and wellness services. The website featured information about vitamin infusions, preventive health screenings, and consultation services for patients seeking alternative medical approaches. The facility was licensed by the State Medical Board. It employed 2 physicians whose credentials checked out in professional databases. The center maintained proper insurance and paid its business taxes. Patient reviews online were generally positive, praising the staff for being attentive and the facility for being clean and professional. Nothing about the public-facing operation suggested anything beyond a legitimate medical practice serving patients interested in wellness and preventive care. The investigation began not with the medical center itself, but with a missing person report filed in another state. A man had traveled to the region for what his family understood to be a medical procedure. He had been in contact regularly until approximately 3 weeks before the report was filed. Then communication stopped. His phone went to voicemail. Messages went unanswered. His family became concerned and eventually contacted police. Local investigators found that the man had purchased a plane ticket and hotel reservation. Credit card records showed charges at a few restaurants and stores during the first 2 days of his trip. Then the financial activity stopped. The hotel confirmed he had checked out as scheduled. But there was no record of a return flight, no additional credit card activity, and no response to any attempts at contact. The family provided information about the medical procedure their relative had mentioned. He had been suffering from kidney disease and had been on a transplant waiting list for over a year. He had become frustrated with the wait time and had started researching alternative options. He had found information online about a medical center that claimed to facilitate organ transplants through international donor programs. The family hadn't been entirely clear on the details, but understood he was exploring options to expedite his treatment. Federal investigators became involved because organ trafficking is a federal crime and because the case potentially involved interstate commerce and fraud. They began examining the medical center mentioned in the man's communications with his family. The facility's public information described regenerative medicine services but made no specific claims about organ transplants. However, a deeper investigation of online forums and encrypted messaging platforms revealed discussions about the center being a point of contact for people seeking transplant services outside traditional medical systems. Surveillance was established on the medical center. During normal business hours, the facility appeared to function as advertised. Patients arrived for appointments. Staff went about typical medical office activities. Nothing appeared unusual. But investigators noticed that occasionally, usually in evening hours after the center's posted closing time, vehicles would arrive and individuals would enter through a side entrance. These visitors didn't appear to be typical patients, and their visits occurred outside normal operating hours. Building records showed the medical center occupied a ground floor space with examination rooms, a small laboratory area, and administrative offices. But the building's original construction plans revealed a basement level. Current tenant records made no mention of the basement. The medical center's lease documentation specified only the ground floor space. Yet utility usage patterns suggested the building consumed more electricity and water than would be expected for just the ground floor operations. Federal agents obtained warrants based on probable cause that the facility was involved in illegal organ trafficking and that evidence of these operations would be found on the premises. The tactical plan required careful coordination because the facility was located in an active commercial district, and because the presence of potential medical equipment meant that any forced entry needed to account for possible hazardous materials or critical care situations. SWAT was requested because intelligence suggested the facility might have individuals present who were medically compromised and couldn't be moved quickly. The operation would require not just tactical operators but also medical personnel capable of assessing and stabilizing patients who might be in various stages of medical procedures or recovery. Ambulances were staged nearby. Hospital trauma teams were placed on standby. The entry was planned for 5:34 a.m. on a Wednesday, early enough that the facility would likely be closed to regular patients, but late enough that if overnight medical activities were occurring, staff would still be present. Surveillance had shown that on several previous occasions, vehicles were present at the facility during very early morning hours before departing around 6 a.m. 16 tactical operators divided into 3 teams. Primary entry through the main front entrance. Secondary team positioned at the side entrance where after-hours visitors had been observed. Third team responsible for securing the perimeter and preventing anyone from fleeing. Medical personnel and federal agents staged immediately behind the tactical teams, ready to enter once the facility was secured. At 5:32 a.m., teams moved into position. The commercial district was quiet. Most businesses wouldn't open for several hours. 2 vehicles were parked near the medical center, confirming that someone was inside. Thermal imaging detected heat signatures consistent with multiple people on the ground floor and what appeared to be activity in the basement area that wasn't supposed to exist according to official records. At 5:34 a.m., both entry points were breached simultaneously. The front door was reinforced beyond standard commercial security but yielded to hydraulic equipment. The side entrance was accessed through a window after that door proved to have electronic locks that would have taken too long to bypass mechanically. The ground floor was cleared rapidly. 2 individuals in medical scrubs were present in what appeared to be a recovery room. Both were detained without resistance. The examination rooms and administrative offices were empty, but a locked door in the back corridor led to a stairwell descending to the basement level. The door was forced and operators descended into a space that looked nothing like the wellness center advertised on the ground floor. The basement was configured as a medical facility, but one clearly designed for operations that couldn't happen in a legitimate hospital. The main area contained 4 hospital-style beds, all currently empty. Surgical equipment was positioned around the space. IV stands, monitoring devices, an anesthesia system. This was an operating suite hidden beneath a wellness center that claimed to offer vitamin infusions and health screenings. Adjacent to the main surgical area were 3 smaller rooms. The first room contained medical supplies and pharmaceutical storage. The second room was configured as a recovery space with 2 beds. Both beds were occupied. The individuals in those beds were connected to IV lines and monitoring equipment. They appeared to be sedated or unconscious. The third room was locked with a commercial-grade security door. Operators forced entry and found a space divided into multiple sections by privacy curtains. Behind those curtains were 21 people. Some were lying on cots. Others were sitting or standing. All showed signs of recent medical procedures: surgical dressings, IV ports, bandages covering what appeared to be incision sites. Medical personnel entered immediately to begin assessment. The 2 unconscious individuals in the recovery room required immediate evaluation. Both were stable but showed signs of having undergone recent surgery. Based on the incision locations and medical equipment present, it appeared both had been organ donors. The procedures had been conducted within the past 72 hours based on wound appearance and recovery status. The 21 people in the locked room revealed a more disturbing situation. They weren't post-surgical patients recovering from procedures. They were being held in preparation for surgeries that hadn't happened yet. Medical assessments showed that all 21 had been through extensive pre-operative screening, blood work, tissue typing, the kind of comprehensive medical evaluation that precedes organ donation, but none of them were voluntary donors participating in legitimate transplant programs. Interviews through translators revealed they had been recruited with promises of payment for kidney donation. They had been told the procedures would be safe, performed by qualified surgeons, and that they would receive substantial compensation that would help support their families. They had been brought to the facility, undergone medical testing, and then been told they needed to remain on site until suitable recipients were identified. But what was supposed to be a few days of waiting had stretched into weeks for some. They had been kept in the locked basement room. They had received adequate food and water. Medical staff checked on them regularly, but they weren't free to leave. Their identification documents had been collected for supposed administrative processing. They had been told that leaving before completing the donation would result in legal consequences or demands for repayment of costs already incurred. Several had asked to withdraw from the program. They had become uncomfortable with the conditions and wanted to return home. They had been told it was too late to back out. Contracts had been signed. Medical costs had been invested. Recipients were already identified and expecting the procedures. Backing out now would create legal liabilities they couldn't afford. The reality was darker than coerced donation. The two individuals found unconscious in the recovery room had not simply donated kidneys. Medical examination suggested multiple organs had been harvested. The procedures weren't the single kidney removal they had supposedly consented to. They had been subjected to more extensive organ harvesting while under anesthesia. Whether they would survive these procedures was uncertain. Their current condition was critical. The investigation rapidly expanded. Computers seized from the facility contained records of previous procedures. Over the past 3 years, the medical center had facilitated organ removals from 87 individuals. Some procedures involved single kidney donations that might have been survivable. Others involved multiple organ harvesting that would have been fatal or left donors in permanent medical crisis. The records also included recipient information. Wealthy individuals from multiple states who had paid substantial sums to receive organs outside the traditional transplant system. Some recipients might have believed they were participating in legitimate international organ-sharing programs. Others appeared to have known they were purchasing organs from exploited donors. The recipient list included prominent business people, professionals, and individuals with resources to pay the six-figure prices the operation charged. Financial records showed the network had generated millions of dollars over 3 years. Organ prices ranged from $150,000 to over $400,000 depending on the organ and urgency. Donors were paid a fraction of these amounts if they were paid at all. Many had been promised payments that never materialized after procedures were completed. Some had been told their compensation would be sent to family members in their home countries, but the transfers never occurred. The facility's license and legitimate operations on the ground floor provided perfect cover. The wellness center generated modest, legitimate revenue that explained the business's existence. Building inspectors who checked the facility saw only the ground floor because basement access wasn't documented in current plans. Patients who received vitamin infusions or health screenings had no idea that, beneath the examination rooms they sat in, the two physicians whose licenses legitimized the facility were both present at the time of the raid and were arrested. One was found attempting to delete files from a computer in the administrative office. The other was in the basement preparing medical equipment for what appeared to be a procedure, scheduled for later that morning. Both initially claimed they were operating within legal frameworks by facilitating international organ donation programs. But the evidence was overwhelming that they were harvesting organs from coerced donors and selling them to recipients who bypassed. The investigation revealed the operation's structure extended across 4 states. The medical center where the raid occurred was the primary surgical facility. But the network included recruitment operations in 2 other states where vulnerable people were approached with offers of payment for organ donation. And a 4th state housed administrative operations that handled financial transactions and coordination with recipients. Recruitment targeted people in desperate financial situations, homeless individuals, undocumented immigrants, people with addiction issues who needed money, anyone who could be convinced that selling a kidney was a rational choice to solve immediate problems. Recruiters approached people in shelters, on streets, and through informal networks. They presented organ donation as a safe medical procedure that would take a few days and provide payments of $20,000 to $30,000. People who agreed were transported to the medical center. They underwent screening to ensure their organs were viable. Those who passed screening were held in the basement facility until recipients were identified. The wait could be days or weeks. During that time, donors were told they needed to remain on site for medical monitoring. When recipients were ready, procedures were conducted in the basement surgical suite. Donors were told they would be donating a single kidney. But while under anesthesia, surgical decisions were made based on recipient, demand, and organ viability. If multiple recipients needed organs and the donor's condition allowed, additional harvesting occurred. Donors woke up having lost more than they had consented to if they survived the procedures at all. The two individuals found unconscious in recovery had been scheduled for single kidney donations according to the consent forms they had signed. Medical examination revealed both had undergone multi-organ harvesting. One had lost both kidneys and part of liver, tissue. The other had undergone kidney and pancreas removal. Both procedures went far beyond what was medically safe for donors. Both individuals were in critical condition and required immediate advanced medical care they were transported to a legitimate hospital where trauma surgeons and transplant specialists evaluated their conditions. One individual survived after extensive medical intervention. The other died 4 days after the raid from complications related to the unauthorized organ removal. The death elevated charges against the physicians and network operators from trafficking and fraud to homicide. The 21 people found in the locked holding room were in various stages of preoperative preparation. Some had been there for only a few days. Others had been held for over 3 weeks. All had undergone blood work and tissue typing. All had signed consent forms for single kidney donation. And all would have been subjected to whatever procedures the physicians determined were most profitable regardless of safety or consent limitations. Medical personnel discovered that several of the 21 were scheduled for procedures that morning. Operating schedules found on the basement computers showed 3 surgeries planned for the day of the raid. The first was scheduled for 7:01 a.m. The raid occurred at 5:34 a.m. That gave less than 90 minutes before the first individual would have been sedated and taken to the surgical suite for a procedure that might have involved organ removal beyond what they had agreed to. The investigation examined how the operation had avoided detection for 3 years. The medical center's legitimate license and ground floor operations provided institutional credibility. Patients who visited for wellness services had positive experiences that generated good reviews. The facility passed health inspections because inspectors only examined the licensed ground floor space. And victims who survived procedures were often too traumatized, afraid, or compromised to report what had happened. Some donors who survived single kidney removals believed they had participated in legitimate programs even if the conditions were uncomfortable. They had received some payment, though usually far less than promised. They had been released after recovery and told not to discuss the procedures due to confidentiality agreements. Many disappeared back into the marginal situations they had come from, grateful to have survived and reluctant to draw attention from authorities. The donors who had been subjected to more extensive harvesting often died or were left in such compromised medical conditions that they required immediate hospitalization. In those cases, the network arranged for them to be dropped at emergency rooms with fabricated stories about accidents or medical emergencies. Hospital personnel treated acute conditions but rarely connected these cases to an organized organ trafficking operation. The recipient network was dismantled through analysis of the financial records and communication logs. Federal agents contacted individuals identified as having received organs through the network. Some recipients claimed they believed they were participating in legitimate international organ-sharing programs and were shocked to learn the organs came from exploited and coerced donors. Others' communications suggested they knew or strongly suspected the organs weren't obtained through legal channels but chose not to investigate too carefully. Recipients faced complex legal and ethical situations. Having received an organ wasn't itself a crime if they genuinely believed it was obtained legally, but evidence that recipients knew or should have known the organs came from trafficking operations made them potential co-conspirators. Several recipients cooperated with investigations in exchange for immunity. Others faced charges for participating in and financing the trafficking network. The 3-year operation had affected 87 donors according to records found at the facility. Federal investigators worked to identify and locate these individuals. Some were found living in marginal situations with serious health complications from procedures they had undergone. Others had moved to different states or returned to home countries and were difficult to trace. Several were confirmed dead, though determining whether deaths were related to organ removal procedures was challenging, given the time elapsed and lack of medical documentation. For the 23 people found at the medical center during the raid, the 2 critical patients in recovery and the 21 being held in the locked room, recovery paths varied dramatically. The individual who survived after being subjected to unauthorized multi-organ harvesting faced a lifetime of medical complications and required ongoing care. The individual who died represented the human cost of an operation that treated people as commodity resources to be exploited for profit. The 21 who were extracted before being subjected to procedures were fortunate by comparison. They had been psychologically traumatized by their confinement and the realization of what they had nearly experienced. But they were physically intact. Victim services provided comprehensive support, including medical screening to ensure they hadn't been subjected to procedures without their knowledge, psychological counseling, legal assistance, and help transitioning away from the desperation that had made them vulnerable to recruitment in the first place. The 2 physicians were charged with federal trafficking offenses, conspiracy, practicing medicine in violation of ethical standards, homicide in connection with the death of 1 victim, and multiple other counts. Additional arrests included recruiters who had approached vulnerable people with donation offers, administrators who had coordinated financial transactions, and individuals who had facilitated the network's operations in other states. The trial presented extensive evidence. Testimony from the 21 people who had been held in the locked room. Medical records documenting procedures that went beyond consented donations. Financial records showing the enormous profits generated from selling organs to wealthy recipients. And communications that proved the network's operators knew they were exploiting vulnerable people in ways that violated medical ethics, consent principles, and basic human rights. Convictions were secured against the primary operators. The 2 physicians received life sentences for their roles in operating the facility and for homicide related to the donor death. Other network members received substantial prison terms. Recipient prosecution was more complex, with outcomes depending on individual knowledge and participation levels. The medical center's license was permanently revoked. The facility was closed and eventually demolished. The basement surgical suite where organs had been harvested from coerced donors was documented extensively for evidence and then destroyed. The building's owner, who claimed no knowledge of basement operations, faced civil liability for allowing the space to be used for criminal activities. For investigators and tactical teams, the operation highlighted how trafficking can exist behind professional facades. A licensed medical facility with legitimate ground floor operations, physicians with valid credentials, a business that passed inspections and maintained proper paperwork. All of it concealing a basement operation that treated human organs as commodities and people as disposable resources. The timing of the raid was critical not just for the 21 people who were hours away from procedures, but for the broader network. If the operation had continued undetected for another year, potentially dozens more people would have been subjected to procedures. The network was profitable and growing. Plans found on seized computers showed expansion to additional facilities in other states. The operation that began with a missing person report and ended with a dawn raid on a medical center prevented that expansion and saved lives that would have been at risk if the network had continued operating. The missing person whose family's report triggered the investigation was never found. He had been one of the 87 donors whose procedures occurred before the raid. Records suggested he had been subjected to extensive organ harvesting and had died from complications. His body had been disposed of in ways that prevented identification and connection to the medical center. His family's persistence in reporting his disappearance and providing information about the facility he had contacted led to the investigation that eventually shut down the network. but their own search for the 23 people found at the facility. The raid represented intervention at various points in a process designed to exploit them. 2 were found after procedures that left them in critical condition. 21 were found before procedures but after weeks of confinement in conditions designed to prevent escape or withdrawal from programs they had initially agreed to participate in. All 23 had been targeted because they were vulnerable, desperate, or both. And all 23 became victims of a network that saw human organs as profitable inventory to be harvested. The medical center had operated for 3 years. 87 donors. 23 found during the raid. Millions generated through organ sales. And 1 death that transformed the case from trafficking and exploitation to homicide. The facility's basement surgical suite had functioned as a hidden operation, conducting procedures that violated every principle of medical ethics and transplant protocols. And it existed beneath a wellness center that maintained a professional appearance and generated positive patient reviews for the legitimate services offered 1 floor above the exploitation occurring below. The raid that began at 5:34 a.m. resulted in the rescue of 23 people and the exposure of a network that had operated across 4 states while hiding behind medical legitimacy and professional credentials. The investigation that followed dismantled the infrastructure that had made the operation possible and held accountable those who had built profits by treating people as resources to be harvested and discarded once their organs had been extracted and sold.